Hello, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing another monthly Q&A. This is where I'm answering questions that you and other viewers have posed in the community tab. A post goes up every month, so if you want to ask me a question this month coming up, post it in there and I'll do one at the end of February or at the start of March answering your questions. So let's get to it. The first question is, do you need to be a reader in order to be a writer? Now, there's only one answer to this, and it's yes, because how could you possibly improve on anything if you're not reading? You have to read, you have to see what people are doing, you have to become really good at not only studying stories, but what the author is trying to do, the techniques they're using. So yes, 100%, it's not really up for debate. You have to be a reader if you want to be a writer. The second question is related to that, and is, do you have to be a reader in the genre that you want to write in? So, slightly more complicated. Now, my default answer is yes, because you should know the market. I think what some writers forget in the rush to get an agent and then hopefully get a publishing deal is that they're focused very much on the book and about the product and making it as best as you can, which you should do. However, you must also keep in the back of your mind, as well as this industry being a creative one, at the end of the day is also a business, and you need to be aware of the space that you're writing in. So if, like me, you're writing fantasy, that you should be reading within that genre. Now, that's not to say you have to read every single book. That's not to say you have to kind of know the ins and outs of every single character and every story arc and what the names of all the series are. But you need to know the space that you're going to be entering and becoming a colleague with all of these various writers. So you need to know who the big players are, what's going on, what are the trends, what's really popular at the moment. Because as I always say, you should never chase a trend. If you see the market's got 40 vampire books all of a sudden and you're thinking, right, I'm about ready to start working on mine, it might be that the market has reached saturation point already, and that's probably not a good idea. The other reason to read within the same genre that you're going to be writing in is to know who some of the authors are that are similar to your work. Because quite often in covering letters or just an inquiry letter to an agent, they will ask you for information about your book, and it is very common to give a comparison. You can say your book is a bit like X and Y. Now, there are two reasons to do it. One, it gives them an idea of where your book sits on the shelf within the bookshop. Whereabouts? Is it grimdark? Is it really positive? Is it a spy story? Is it crime? What sort of subgenre does it sit under? And the second reason is the business side. It shows them that you have an awareness of the industry and the genre that you're writing in today. If you're writing fantasy and you had said something like, oh, well, my book's very much like Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, that's actually not very useful at all, because there's nobody like them today. Not really. And you're comparing to something that's really, really old and isn't kind of in the milieu now. It's not what people are doing. You could say it's like X and Y has similar flavours to, or similar themes to Tolkien, exploring nature and the power of an individual and all this kind of stuff, but you shouldn't compare them to someone that's really, really old, unless you've got a very, very specific reason. As a writer in traditional publishing and even in self-publishing, you need to be a good business person as well. You need to have some commercial awareness. So if you're able to say your book is a bit like two current authors, it means that the agent can then use that when they go forward to the publisher. And it could be that the publisher has published one or both of these books, and it tells them a little bit about what to expect before they even read the first chapter, a little bit about the style, and also it gives them an idea, perhaps or potentially, of the sales potential of your book. If your book is very similar to two really popular titles and it falls quite comfortably somewhere between that space, it gives them a good idea of what they're going to then pitch to the rest of the team within the publisher to then make an offer of an advance based upon all of the sums and the calculations that they do from what they've done in the past. But if you're using stuff that's very out of date from 20 years, 30 years or more, that isn't helpful to anybody, and it's not useful for what's being published today. There are some authors who don't read within the same genre anymore. Now, to be clear, that's only after they've entered the industry. One example is Joe Abercrombie. I did a panel with him last night on TBRCon about morally grey characters. I'll leave a link above where you can go and watch that. He has said originally he was very much a fan of fantasy. He read lots of it growing up, but then he got quite disenchanted with it because it began to feel a bit samey, it was a bit too clean cut, and he stepped away from the genre. And it was years later when he came back and read Game of Thrones that he realised the potential of what he could do and what was being published. Because even if he wanted to do something that was really radical and really amazing, and he had his great story, and then he went and looked on the shelves and nobody was publishing that, there were two reasons. One, no one's thought of it before, or two, it isn't in the current zeitgeist. Editors aren't taking it, agents aren't taking it, maybe the market just isn't ready for it. Those are potentially the reasons. But he came in, he read Game of Thrones and thought, oh wow, complicated, layered, morally ambiguous characters, lots of political machinations, a really grey world. Great, this is the kind of stuff I want to be writing. And that's what he did. Now that he's in the industry, he doesn't want to be influenced by other writers within the genre, so he tends to read outside that space and also draw inspiration from all sorts of things, history, biographies, crime books and films that he loves. He's talked about this in lots of interviews. But I still love the fantasy genre. I still read within that fantasy space, and I'm able to separate my writing brain from my reading brain. So I'm not constantly dissecting other books and thinking about, oh yes, yeah, I could use that idea or something like that. I've got another question that's similar to this, which I'll touch on in a minute. But in general, I would say you should know your industry, know your genre, and read within that space so that you're familiar with it. The next question is, once you are a published author, do you have to have author friends to be successful? So the short answer to this is no. The longer answer is that the friends that you make within the industry are useful and helpful, but they aren't the ones that are going to make you successful or not. It all comes down to the reader. Your agent takes a chance on you, they see something in your work and they believe in you. Your editor does the same thing, and they hope with the best intentions that this book is going to be brilliant, and they put it out into the world, and the readers, you the readers, decide whether it's going to be a success or not. They can put as much marketing in and as many kind of promotions and TikToks and whatever else, but if the readers pick it up and go, I'm just not connecting with it, and they put it down and walk away and it doesn't do well, then that has nothing to do with how well other authors promote it. Now, if you get a great cover quote from a very big named author, that can help initially, but of course remember, some people aren't nearly as caught up in the industry like you are, and here that the fact that you're watching this means you have an interest in writing and perhaps a specific genre. A lot of people don't do that. They walk into bookshops, they pick it up, they look at it, read the back and go, that sounds quite good, and that's it, and they walk away. Airports, people walking through, supermarkets, walking through, picking up a book, read it, walk away. You know, that's what a lot of readers are. So if you're a published author, having friends within the industry is great, because writing is a solitary thing most of the time. I love going to conventions. I love meeting other writers, talking to them, building up a kind of community, because we have the same kind of gripes and issues and struggles, and it's great to kind of talk about them with someone who completely understands. So it's great for that aspect, but other writers will not make you a success or not. It's all down to the reader. This next question was a bit more specific and it is related to the previous ones. It is, what is your process of learning craft, reading books from other writers? How do you learn the craft from other people's work? So as an individual, as the way I do it, is it's a bit more detached in some ways. Reading a really good book inspires me to want to go and write. Now, it's not to say that I'm doing the same kind of thing. So I love Robin Hobb's books. I think they're fantastic. I've got some of my to read pile. But I do something, my stories are very, very different to her. She has a strong focus on character. And while I do have that in my books, our styles are radically different. But reading something like that inspires me and pushes me and just kind of fires my brain. And I think, oh yeah, this is fantastic. This is brilliant. And it reawakens that love of storytelling and the power of it. When a book is so impactful and it makes you emotional and it affects you on a level which is essentially, you know, printed words on a page, completely stationary, but because it has such a effect in the kind of theatre of my mind, it makes me think, oh God, this is brilliant, this is what I want to do, but I'm not copying what they're doing. If I read a book or several books in a style and I think this is quite interesting, perhaps I could adopt some of that style, I'm not pulling on something specific. I've done a couple of other videos actually on this, one about lean prose, and that I'm worried sometimes I overwrite, and I focused on a couple of writers that are within the space that's very different to mine. But there again, I looked at it and thought, yeah, am I getting too purple? Am I just writing too much wordy stuff? How could I make mine really punchy and really tight and yet also convey a lot of message? So that's how I kind of pick it up. It's not a specific thing. I don't go in reading a book thinking I'm going to learn something from this every time. Some of it's just through osmosis. But it all comes down to you as an individual as well. I can't tell you how to do this. I can only say read as much as you can within your genre and, importantly, outside of the genre, so that you have other influences, and absorb as much as you can, swirl it all around in your brain, and something will come out that will hopefully be your voice and it will be original. Here's an interesting question. It's all to do with self-publishing and then moving into the traditional publishing space. The question was, does putting your book on something like Wattpad or Inkpad damage your chances of being traditionally published later? So here's the short answer, too long, don't want to skip to the end of this section. The answer is no, it doesn't affect your chances, and no, it doesn't have an impact. And here's why. Here's the longer answer. I'm going to reel off a list of names, and these are people who have all done self-publishing in different formats on different platforms, and because they were popular, because they had a huge following, because they were doing very, very well, traditional publishers noticed, wanted some of that, and have picked them up and have now been traditionally published for several, or the current series is ongoing, the first series. So Taran Matharu, he was someone who published his YA fantasy series on Wattpad. He had a huge following on that. He was then picked up and he published all of that series traditionally published. He's gone on to write a second traditionally published series. Evan Winter, of course, famously self-published The Rage of Dragons. It was the kind of book he'd always wanted to read, something that he could show to his son that reflected more about him and their culture and their background. Did incredibly well. It's been picked up for a 4-book series. Book 2, The Fires of Vengeance, just came out. He's writing book 3 and book 4 will be out either next year or the year after. Then you look at Mark Lawrence. He started the self-published fantasy blog off. He saw that there were a great many self-published fantasy books out there that needed more attention, that needed more eyes on them. So he started this competition where they have 300 books and whittle it down to 1. And during the course of this, it's now on year 7, I believe, many of the finalists and winners have been picked up for traditional publishing deals. The likes of Jonathan French with his Grey Bastard series. Josiah Bancroft, I think, was a semi-finalist or a finalist, but he didn't actually win this, but because of that, he has now a 4-book deal with Orbit Books, and he's gone on to do other things. Justin Lee Anderson just won the last one, and he's just been recently announced as having picked up an agent, and I suspect a book deal will be coming along soon. Another very recent example, of course, is the Atlas 6, which was enormous success on BookTok. It was then picked up by Tor Books in the UK. Amazon had a 6-way auction over it, and they're now going to be making that into a TV series. So it doesn't hurt your chances at all. If you get a popular following, if you get a lot of people on it and they're really interested, traditional publishers will take notice. Obviously, it'll come off that platform. You won't be able to buy it anymore going forward. It'll be edited, it'll be revised, it'll get a new cover, and then there's probably like a delay about a year, and then it'll come out and be traditionally published and goes out to a wider audience. So it doesn't hurt your chances. And people saying that it does, reel off all the examples that I've given, and there are lots of other ones out there as well. I was also asked to give my opinion on portal fantasies as a trend in YA fiction and whether or not I think they're dead or not. I write adult fantasy, so I don't know anything about YA at all. However, my learned colleague Alexa Dunn writes YA, and she will have a better idea than me, so there's a link down below to her channel. If you haven't already checked it out, you could ask her and she'll be better informed than me. The next question came in from Sadia, and he was asking me about my opinion on alpha readers. And I guess he's coming to the end of getting his manuscript ready and he wants some feedback. Now, related to this, I have heard from a lot of people when they've been sending out their submissions to agents, they are being ghosted. They're getting no feedback. They send it out, they wait an appropriate amount of time, maybe 3 months, 6 months, whatever it might say, for them to get a reasonable response. They chase it up with an email and they get nothing back at all. No standard, no thank you email, just absolute silence. And this is really awful. It goes back to when I first started sending out submissions, it was through the post, and it was worse because you'd get no response. You get your material sent back in a self-addressed envelope that I had written, and as soon as I saw my own handwriting on the envelope, I knew that it was my book being rejected. Sometimes it came back with nothing inside, sometimes it just came back with a card that just sort of said dear, and they inserted my name, and it was a printed standard rejection thing that gave me no information. And in those instances, and with this current ghosting thing, you have no idea why your book has been rejected. What is it? Is it the technique? Is it just really sloppy? Is it the story? Is it the characters? Is it the world-building? What doesn't work? So now more than ever, I think getting people to read your book before you send it out is very important, because you get that instant feedback from someone. Hopefully they read that genre. They're not just someone that you've met for the first time that doesn't like that genre. You want someone to be interested and engaged in it. My mum doesn't read fantasy. She read my first book and she struggled with it, which is, not surprising. So I wouldn't ask her for feedback. She's read the rest of my books now and she loves them, she says, but that's because I'm her son, obviously. But if someone else, reads your book and they love it and they're into that genre and they're like, oh, it's brilliant, it's like this book and that book and it reminds me of X and Y, or they read the book and they go, I liked it, but what is the book? What are they struggling with? You want that constructive feedback. You want to know what it is that's the issue and try and iron out as many of those things as you can up front. Now, of course, that doesn't guarantee that when you send it out to an agent, they're going to respond, but at least you know then you've done the best that you can and you haven't just relied upon your own feedback and your own kind of internal edits. You've given it to half a dozen people, and maybe you have to read their book in return, a kind of quid pro quo, and that works quite well. If you can find an online community or a local writing group or something like that, I would definitely do it. Okay, so those are all the questions I received this month. If you've got any questions for next month, post them in the community tab, but I'll be back next week with another video.